Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young-Kyo Kim. In his inaugural speech, South Korea's new president Yoon Suk-yeol promised an audacious plan to strengthen North Korea's economy in exchange of Kim Jong-un's tangible steps toward denuclearization of the country. But just 2 days later, North Korea fired 3 short-range missiles into the sea while publicly admitting to a COVID outbreak for the first time. Today, we'll discuss these and more.
북한 경제와 북한 주민의 삶을 획기적으로 개선할 수 있는 담대한 계획을 준비하겠습니다.
The DPRK is also reconstructing its nuclear testing site in preparation for a 7th nuclear test.
In the studio with me is Joseph Detrani. Ambassador Detrani was former special envoy for the six-party talks. He was also director of National Counter-Proliferation Center. Also joining me is Mark Tokola, vice president of the Korea Economic Institute of America. Mr. Tokola had served as deputy chief of mission at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul. Thank you so much for your time today. Really
Thank you.
Good to have you both in the studio.
Pleasure. Great being here.
Well, first of all, Ambassador Detrani, what's your impression about what the President Yoon Suk-yeol said about North Korea in his first speech as president?
Well, I think what he said was positive in the sense that he's prepared to engage, the Yoon administration is prepared to engage with North Korea. We're talking about complete, verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. South Korea has no nuclear weapons, so we're talking about North Korea. I think that's encouraging, and he's talking about being audacious. Mm-hmm. That means going beyond talking about the Libya model. You give up all your nuclear weapons first, and then maybe we'll talk to you about what some of the deliverables will be for you. I think he's prepared to move forward in an action-for-action basis where North Korea gets some benefits, if you will, security assurances, et cetera, certain sanctions being lifted, as they move towards denuclearization. So I think he's ready to look at a very comprehensive roadmap. And for me, I think that's encouraging. And I think for North Korea, I think they would be at least receptive, not necessarily amenable, receptive to hearing what the new administration has, the Yoon administration has in regards to North Korean relations.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Tokola, what Yoon Suk-yeol said, is this similar to what South Korea's previous conservative presidents have said?
Oh, it was similar. What President Yoon said was nothing remarkably new. I think both the South Korean administrations and the United States have said for years that if North Korea would abandon its nuclear weapons program, many things would become possible, including economic aid. But just because it wasn't new doesn't mean it wasn't worth saying. I think having campaigned by talking about being tough on North Korea, I think it's important for President Yoon to signal early that he's interested in a diplomatic way forward.
Mm-hmm. Is it similar, Yoon's approach, is it similar or is it aligned with President Biden's approach towards North Korea? I'm asking you this because former President Moon Jae-in's North Korea policy was often criticized for running counter to U.S. policy regarding North Korea. So what's your thought on this?
Yeah, people said that. I wasn't sure that was true. Mm-hmm. I think President Moon Jae-in and the Biden administration coordinated very closely with North Korea. Mm-hmm. There was talk about the end of war declaration, but the two administrations consulted closely, and in the end, it did not go forward, which to me is a sign of cooperation, not disagreement.
Ambassador, what's your thought on this?
No, I agree with Mark on that. I think we were in sync with the Moon Jae-in government, the Biden administration. I think there was an approach. I do think, however, that the Moon Jae-in administration was hoping for a little more flexibility from the Biden administration, flexibility on the issue of sanctions relief. possibly looking at a freeze. So something to get North Korea to re-engage. And I think that was that element of disappointment, that there was nothing really new put on the table. And it's understandable why nothing new was put on the table, because we've been there before, giving, if you will, some concessions, advantages. But I think there was a bit of disappointment from the Moon Jae-in government as to how the Biden administration was addressing the North Korean issue.
If I could add a brief footnote on that. One thing people grumble about is the lack of joint military exercises. And for some reason now they're thinking that was Moon Jae-in's fault. They forgot that it was Donald Trump who suspended the joint exercises unilaterally. Right. Didn't even consult South Korea. So that one's on us.
I see. And the inauguration took place, and just 2 days later, North Korea fired three short-range missiles into the sea. Ambassador, is this North Korea's response to Yoon Suk-yeol's suggestion?
This is how North Korea does business. We've had over 30 years of negotiating with North Korea. I mean, even before you have a formal negotiation, they will launch missiles, short-range ballistic missiles. This is how they do business. They want their interlocutors, in this case, South Korea, the new Yoon administration, to focus on North Korea. And North Korea needs to make it very clear they're dealing from a position of strength. They're showing what they have on their, if you will, their ballistic missile capabilities. So no, I'm not surprised. This is how they've been doing business for over 30 years.
So and we talk about North Korean missile launches as being signals, but they're also engineering projects. They're developing their weapons.
Sure.
And so if they're signaling us or not, they're still developing their weapons.
Yeah, and they've certainly been having significant developmental progress during this past year. I mean, over 16 missiles have been launched.
Exactly.
Pretty impressive.
I mean, I was going to ask you about that. The latest one was North Korea's 16th round of missile tests this year. So is this just about developing their own technologies, or no signal at all?
Well, if you look over the long term, I mean, no matter what's been going on, they've been developing their weapons. They've been doing testing or laboratory work or bench work. So I think if you just look at the trend, this maybe it's accelerated pace a bit, but it's not out of line with what they've been doing for all along. They're always testing because they need to. I think it's part of their weapons development program.
Ambassador, so North Korea doesn't have willingness to talk with the United States right
So far, with the Biden administration, they've shown no willingness. But again, we have to go back to the Hanoi summit, which takes us back to 2019, right? Where they were so disappointed. Certainly Kim Jong-un was so disappointed from the U.S. side. So I think that started at that time, although there was a short DMZ, meeting between President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, but that was all, celebratory, no substance. So it's not just the Biden administration, it was towards the end of the Trump administration also that there was really no interaction between the U.S. and the DPRK.
So I'm wondering, the North Korea firing missile doesn't necessarily mean they're not willing to talk.
Well, I agree with Mark that they were firing missiles. They're working on their technology. They're perfecting it. Now when they launched the Hwasong 17, this is an intercontinental ballistic missile that can reach the whole of the United States. They're working on those capabilities. And as Kim Jong-un said in his speech in January of 2021, hypersonics and ICBMs, and they're going to MIRV the ICBMs, they're going to submarine launch ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. He's talking about a very aggressive program to enhance not only his missile delivery systems, but we have to also keep in mind, as we talk, he's building more nuclear weapons. There's more fissile material being produced, and they're building more nuclear weapons. So we're seeing the missile part of it, but what we're not seeing is what he's doing with his nuclear weapons program.
Okay, missile launching aside, I think two things have happened. One was Hanoi came as a shock to Pyongyang. They expected to get a deal. They didn't get one. There's still recrimination, I think, about what happened there. So that's been slowing up diplomacy while they analyze that. And then second, they're in the middle of a national extreme emergency on COVID. I think they're very preoccupied with domestic concerns.
Yep.
All right. And the U.S. government, both White House and the State Department, they're assessing that North Korea could do its 7th nuclear test as early as this month. Mr. Tokola, this is anybody's guess, but is this likely?
I'll go with your anybody's guess line. I've got no idea. We don't know. There's always signals they're preparing or tunneling or moving things around. They may test or may not. I wouldn't predict.
What is the possibility?
Well, I think Punggye, they are working on those tunnels to reactivate the facility. No, I think they will have a 7th nuclear test. I think the thermonuclear test that we saw in 2017 was successful. It got everyone's attention. This is a hydrogen bomb. This is pretty significant. I think there will be, and it's a clear message that indeed is, but also on the technology side, they're working on those capabilities, but it's also a very direct message that, the moratorium obviously is over since the Trump administration and the summits. That's over, the self-imposed moratorium on missile delivery systems and on nuclear development. That's over, and North Korea is just going to move, as Kim Jong-un said early on. This goes back to 2012, 2013. He's going to really build and again in January 2021, he's really going to rush and put more emphasis on building his nuclear and missile delivery systems and so forth. And that's the reality. And my last comment on that is he's proven to be rather successful in those endeavors, as we saw with the Hwasong 17, as we're seeing with the cruise missiles, even the hypersonic missiles. That's pretty significant technology. So I think we have to take note of the fact that when he says he's going to be doing something, they put their resources into it and they do it. So we have to be concerned about where he is on his nuclear program.
You want to add something to it?
Yes. I mean, I think the question then becomes what happens if he does test? And on that, I think we need to do something different.
Yeah.
I mean, Special Representative Sung Kim has talked about a decisive response. I'm not sure what that means exactly, but it can't just be sanctions. I mean, sanctions have been played out. North Korea is sanctioning itself through its COVID measures. We probably need to respond in some way closer to home. We probably need to think about two things I would suggest. One is to move to suspend North Korea's voting rights in the United Nations. If they violate UN resolutions over and over, there should be consequences. Second, I think we need to respond in the nuclear area. I would propose that we organize a nuclear policy planning group like NATO has, but among Indo-Pacific countries.
So, Mr. Tokola, you mentioned about United Nations Security Council's role, but then there are even some skepticism among the members of the Security Council that whether this is really working to stop North Korea from testing its nuclear weapons.
I think it's difficult these days, but I think that you have to go there anyway, because what does it look like if you don't? I mean, if you stop using the United Security Council to talk about North Korea, it's almost implying that we are deciding it's okay after all, or the violations don't matter. We have to go to the UN forum every time.
And then you mentioned about NATO's the cooperation.
Right. There's a NATO group called Nuclear Planning Group, and even countries who don't have nuclear weapons get to be involved in conversations about how they might be deterred or might be used. Maybe the United States, Japan, South Korea, Australia should have a nuclear planning group to talk about what might happen or how to deter nuclear weapons. That would signal North Korea, I think, they were serious about what they're doing.
Ambassador, what is the right response here?
Well, one is, and I think the Yoon administration has said this, they're looking at enhancing their missile defense capabilities, possibly a second THAAD deployment. They're looking at re-energizing, if you will, the joint military exercises that have been going on. So I think, and reconfirming the strategic relationship with the United States, possibly even joining the Quad. It's a defensive organization. These are very positive moves. Further to the point of consequences, if North Korea has a 7th nuclear test, indeed there should be consequences. But your point's right on. You have Russia and you have the People's Republic of China in the Security Council, and sanctions, they're not going to go anywhere. As we've seen over the last few weeks, they're not going anywhere in that regard. Well, we have to really sit down certainly with China and say, it's not working. Liu Xiaoming had just visited Seoul 2 weeks ago. Yeah. And Liu Xiaoming was also their ambassador, China's ambassador to Pyongyang. He knows the North Koreans. He also knows the US. He was our deputy chief of mission here. So China needs to be playing more of a role here to get North Korea off of this road they're on right now, which is really exacerbating relations not only with the United States, but with China and the region.
Mr. Tokola, then there could be some realistic approach towards this?
Don't talk about denuclearization first. talk about conventional arms restrictions, talk about chemical weapons convention. There's other topics we could raise with North Korea.
Right.
Second, we could bring in friends, have more countries involved, Mongolia, Vietnam, European Union, expand the dialogue. Third, the US and South Korea could make a joint offer to North Korea publicly to show that we're taking the initiative.
All right. So North Korea confirmed the COVID-19 outbreak for the first time, and they made it public that 6 people have died and 350,000 people have been treated for a fever that has spread explosively across North Korea. So Ambassador, why is North Korea admitting to have COVID outbreak now?
Because it's so severe. This is something that really is, I mean, the healthcare system is, we know this, very weak. We know this from the United Nations study with the DPRK, over 40% of the population is malnourished. We know this from the 1990s when they had the food shortages, significant starvation that was going on in the mid-90s. So we know there's a confluence of issues that came together. So I think this is North Korea saying, we do have this problem. They don't have a vaccine. The COVAX vaccine has never been accepted. Even China's offers have not been accepted. So, and the testing is minimal, if anything. So they're really in a dire position here. So I think what they're basically saying, and this is where China, especially China, can do some and the Republic of Korea. This is where the Yoon administration said we're prepared to send, if you will, the whatever vaccine they're using there to address this issue.
Mr. Tokola, is this North Korea sending an SOS to the international community?
It may be. I mean, this is an important moment. It's remarkable to see Kim Jong-un wearing a mask on television. Something has changed. And what I'm hoping this is the prelude to accepting international assistance. I hope they're preparing the public for that.
I mean, hearing this news, the White House said it supports the international community's efforts to really help North Korea vaccinating its own people. And South Korean President Yoon said he's willing to offer to send COVID-19 vaccines, but will they accept it? Because in the past, they have been rejecting it, right?
They have rejected in the past. It's been offered. Both the US and South Korea have offered vaccinations. They rejected them. It may be that they're starting to feel that they can't control this pandemic. So they may need the help at that point.
Yeah, I think they're in a dire position right now, and I think there'll be a lot of receptivity to do that. But strike a lot of receptivity. For North Korea, there's never a lot of receptivity. I think North Korea will continue to, stay self-reliant. We can manage this ourselves. But I think, as you just said correctly a minute ago, I personally think this is a message where Kim Jong-un is sort of saying, look, I mean, we try to do it on our own, and it's not gotten any better. In fact, it's gotten worse. And now with the drought and some of the other issues there, the potential for, areas of starvation, this is something where, and again, where China, but again, the Yoon administration, this is a perfect time.
Right.
And I think it was the right move on the part of the Yoon administration to say, look, the vaccine will make it available to you. But this is also an opportunity to talk about not only the vaccine, but we're looking at the healthcare system, but looking at some systemic issues where they could engage with North Korea.
Mr. Tokola, is there any way for North Korea to accept this kind of offer from international community without losing its face?
Oh, they accepted food aid in the past without losing face. What they will say is this is a humanitarian problem. We're entitled to assistance and we'll accept it. I think they'd have no trouble with that. What they will object to is any kind of monitoring. But is that the most important thing today? Probably not. I mean, Joe is right. It's a malnourished population with a broken down public health system and no vaccinations. They're in danger.
And I think many people are curious that maybe if this could work as an opening for engagement between South Korea and North Korea, or even United States and North Korea. Do you think that's possible?
It's possible. That's a secondary consideration. I mean, the most important thing is trying to save North Korean lives. And if it helps diplomacy, that's good. If it doesn't, we should help anyway.
I totally agree with that. There's no question. We're talking about 24 million people, and the situation is truly dire. Yeah, we've got humanitarian has to be number one here, and diplomacy has to be number two. Hopefully, the two can come together, and the key here is building trust. Because when we come together and we do things together, whether it's the World Food Program and getting food aid in there and everything, you start to build trust, you start to communication. And that's what we've not been seeing for the last almost 3 years.
President Biden is scheduled to visit South Korea later this month. And what do you think will be on top of his agenda?
Well, certainly North Korea. There's no question North Korea's got to be on top of the agenda, and it should be on top of the agenda. I mean, we're talking about the Korean Peninsula. We're talking about the potential for instability in the North and what that means. A North Korea that's now, with the leader, Kim Jong-un, saying the nuclear weapons are not only for deterrence purposes, but he could, if he perceives a threat to the DPRK, you could use nuclear weapons or even preemptively use nuclear weapons. So yes, I think we need to talk, they will talk about North Korea, but hopefully they're talking also about a roadmap and how we can get the Chinese more engaged, how we can tell the North Koreans we're prepared to be flexible and creative. But the core issue is never and not accepting North Korea as a nuclear weapons state. We're talking about complete verifiable denuclearization in return for the benefits. And I go back to the September 19, 2005 joint statement from the six-party talks. That's not a bad document to be looking at.
I see. Mr. Tokola, yeah.
I
go
might
ahead.
disagree a little bit. I'm actually not sure North Korea is going to be the number thing on their agenda. If North Koreans do something provocative, it'll have to be. But I think that Presidents Biden and Yoon would probably like to not talk about North Korea. I think what we're going to talk about is how to pave South Korea's way into this global community effort that Biden and Yoon was talked about. Whether it's Quad Plus, whether it's working with the EU and Australia, how to work with Japan.
No,
it's going to be multilateralism. It'll be the theme.
I think it's an excellent point. I think certainly the Quad, talking about enhancing missile defense, joint military exercises. But a lot of that is in relation not only to North Korea, but the China piece. So I think China will be maybe not in the news, but will be discussed also.
And Ukraine.
And Ukraine, what's going on in Ukraine, which makes even complete verifiable denuclearization with North Korea that much more difficult, because they're seeing what's happening in Ukraine.
And then North Korea's, maybe the COVID vaccine aid
It could
will
be.
be
I think
on the
supply chains, resiliency would be a big issue because Korea is such an important country in the world for its technology exports and developments.
I see.
So I think the semiconductor supply chains will be a big issue too. And 5G and artificial intelligence. There's a lot on the U.S. South Korea technical agenda that needs to be talked about.
Right. I see.
Energy. I should have mentioned energy.
What do you expect to see in the coming months in terms of the relationship? I mean, a lot of things happened obviously in North Korea as well. So do you expect to see this kind of provocations continue?
Yeah, my personal view is yes, I do think. However, the coronavirus, that's a new issue that's been put on the table. So that could change the whole dynamic. It could provide an opportunity to move in a different direction. But having said that, I do believe further escalation will continue. I think there will be another nuclear test. I think North Korea will persist with even more missile launches. But again, the coronavirus, and now admitting to having that situation in North Korea, I think that has to be considered very seriously. But no, I think he's on an escalatory path, and I think he's going to continue on that path. And I think he's got China and Russia that are very supportive of what's going on there. And again, the U.S.-China relationship is so important in regards to resolution of this North Korean issue. And this is where we, the United States and China, really have to come together and say this is an issue that affects not only our respective countries and the Republic of Korea, but the region and the world. So hopefully that's going to be movement with China.
Provocations are different because the psychology of the world has changed. We're not talking about a hypothetical war, we're talking about a real war that's going on now. It just overshadows provocations, I'm afraid. We're going to have to take the time to respond to a North Korean provocation. It's going to be a headline for a day or two. I mean, what's going on in the world is much more important now.
I see. North Korea is widely expected to conduct its 7th nuclear test as early as this month, when the country is battling with a major COVID-19 outbreak. How will the situation affect the stalemate over North Korea's denuclearization? It is yet to find out. Ambassador Detrani and Mr. Tokola, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.